Hey, Missileman. I think I sent you an invitation, didn't I?
Hey, how are you? How's my audio?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
Good. I'm just in the car, so I apologize for any background noise.
No, it's all good. Are you on your way home? You wanna wait a little bit until you get to where you wanna go, or I couldn't hear you there.
Okay, how about now? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, yeah. So, um, I want this to be like well, first of all, welcome to whoever is here. This is a special Psicoactivo episode. Yesterday, I did a video of a reaction and an analysis of Colonel Karl Nell's presentation on the World Disclosure Day event. And I saw Missileman's reaction to it. And I know a little bit of his background, but I would like it if you could give us a little bit of your background, obviously without making any revelations that could potentially jeopardize your identity. Um, so people know who I am speaking to in terms of background.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I've been known as Missileman on UFO Twitter now for like about 2 years or so. First became interested in UFOs when I was very young, like 5 or 6. My dad was a double E in the defense industry, and so I heard about UFOs very early on. We were all a very, scientific sci-fi household. So I went to undergrad for mathematics. Then I went to graduate school for aerospace engineering, and I did pulsed fusion research in grad school, um, and published a number of papers. It was during that time that at a conference I was introduced to Dr. Eric Davis and Jacques Vallée and a couple other folks in that world, Sonny White, a few others that are still active in like anti-gravity research and publishing papers about Alcubierre drive and things like that. And didn't go anywhere. There was a sequestration based budget constriction going on in space and defense and rocketry and space exploration. So I went out into the world and did some much less interesting work. Worked on satellites for a while, and since then I've worked on commercial satellites, strategic satellites, tactical missile platforms, strategic missile platforms, hypersonics, commercial space, a number of things. And I, a little while ago, went back to school to start a PhD program in material science. So I don't have a PhD yet. I'm, working towards a PhD in material science.
So you're a PhD candidate, essentially, right? But you're a rocket scientist, so.
Yeah, I'm a rocket scientist, basically, yeah.
Okay. So with that out of the way, what was your raw reaction when you heard Nell talking about this? Because you've been studying it clearly, and you said that it got nowhere, but clearly Nell is claiming that it is real, that people at NASA acknowledge it as being possible. What was your initial reaction to that? Because
Yeah. So what I meant is that in the open, at the amount of dollars, research dollars, and open positions and companies working it in the open, in the public domain was near nil in that time period. And actually, the only folks doing any work back then was a Panamanian astronaut named Chang Diaz, who owned a company called Ad Astra Rocketry, who was doing a plasma propulsion based engine, but not FTL, not anti-gravity, just a very advanced, plasma based rocket. And so I think it's very clear, obviously from Nell's disclosures and Grush and others going back 75 years, that there's been a lot more awareness of some underlying physics that allows you to manipulate gravity or manipulate space-time or move FTL in some kind of way. And, there are 3 or 4 different schools of thought about how to approach that. You've had the Alcubierre school of thought, which is kind of classical general relativity approach, where you don't need any new physics beyond general relativity for the most part, other than, as Nell mentioned, there is this negative energy requirement in Alcubierre's math, which is what turned off a lot of people and kind of caused his work to be somewhat, sidelined or considered fringe, was simply because we had no concept of what negative energy meant at the time. It felt like a hypothetical. And so a lot of people became interested, but wanted to refine his work to come up with smaller and smaller amounts of negative mass needed to make that happen, or negative energy in either case, needed to actually make it work. And so there's been a number of papers over the years that have attempted to build on his work. His work was considered very credible by plenty of physicists who wanted to show how it could work. So there's that school of thought. And then there's the whole electrogravitics school of thought. The second sort of bucket is electrogravitics, which is like electrical energy converted into gravitational energy. And so you run some kind of device that allows you to manipulate gravity by playing with far more familiar forces like electromagnetism and photons and electrons. And then kind of the third bucket is this idea that you manipulate the vacuum, you manipulate space-time with this concept of vacuum fluctuations, 0-point energy, the vacuum energy. This is the different terms for the same concept. And what was so bombshell about what Nell said is he equated the concepts of the Casimir force, which is caused by vacuum fluctuations, and dark energy, and Alcubierre's negative energy. And I don't know that anybody in like futurism, advanced propulsion science has ever made that connection before. I know that dark energy has been associated with vacuum potential before, but I don't believe anybody's ever brought Alcubierre or the notion of negative energy into it. So that was what was a really big deal for me, because that sounded informed by advances made behind the walls.
And well, Nell does have the credentials to talk about this officially, right? So that's what made it even more interesting.
He does. Yeah, he absolutely does. So if you can find his military service record and or his LinkedIn, he spent a very short time as a junior employee at Lockheed. Probably nothing happened there. It was pretty early and he was pretty junior and he wasn't there very long. But he was a reserve officer in the Army for most of his career. He was not like fully active duty for like 25 years and then left. It wasn't one of those. He was reserve. So he was working and in the Army at the same time. And during one of those assignments, he was assigned to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, to where they do to Air Force Materiel Command, where they do foreign material exploitation. So it has been, public information since the 1960s that the National Air and Space Intelligence Center, based at Wright-Pat, which is NASIC, which is kind of a fusion center for NRO and NGIA, as referenced by David Grush. It's been known for quite some time that their mission, part of their mission, is to conduct air and space intelligence using information gathered by recovering foreign technology and reverse engineering it and understanding it. And so that facility has the skills and the facilities and, the background to be used as a cover for the technology of unknown origin reverse engineering program. And it's known that Nell was there and that he was deployed to the field somewhere in the world, to a combat zone, with like a DIA partner program. So that could have been, picking up a Russian S-300 in Syria, or it could have been picking up the Mosul orb after it crashed. We don't know. But that's a plausible place that he could have been exposed to the program.
Okay, and these energies, though, because we've heard Dr. Stephen Greer talk about 0-point energy. It's not a term that he coined per se, but he's the one who's used it the most. What is your take on this term? Because before Nell spoke about it, I really just saw it as some kind of science fiction term, if you know what I mean. What do you think about it after?
Yeah. I thought that you had a little snippet of Hal Puthoff speaking about the quantum vacuum fluctuations from like a number of years ago. I think that's a very good synopsis, is that it was predicted as a necessary side effect of quantum uncertainty, because the 0-point energy field, they call it 0 point because it's the minimum quantum energy state that you can have. And it turns out that a consequence of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle is that you cannot have a zero value, because then all of these particles, virtual particles or otherwise, have a perfectly known energy and potentially at a perfectly known time. So to dive into the math a tiny bit, technically Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, it doesn't apply to everything. It applies to something called conjugate variables in quantum mechanics. And it turns out that, like, for example, position and momentum of an atom are conjugate variables, and then energy and I think time, but I could be misquoting that, energy and something else. And so those are the two variables whose values you cannot know any more accurately than something called h bar over 2. And h bar is Planck's constant over 2 pi or something like that. And so if you go look up Heisenberg's uncertainty relations, it's a less than or equal to kind of equation, and it will show you, and it will have a bunch of gobbledygook math in it, but it will say momentum and position and then energy and something else. And there are other pairs of conjugate variables in quantum mechanics for which this applies. But this concept in quantum is why 0-point energy has to exist, and has since been confirmed to exist via the Casimir force experiments, I think starting in the 1950s and progressing all the way to the 1990s. So, part 2. Yes, 0-point energy is real. Yes, quantum fluctuations are real. We know that because there was a Nobel Prize awarded in the 1940s to I think Willis Lamb for the Lamb shift, which is this effect that is caused by 0-point energy, where a lone hydrogen atom with one electron, basically a free hydrogen atom, that electron should be one energy level, but it turns out to degenerate into 2. And that's because the tiny vacuum fluctuations are significant enough to perturb it into 2 energy levels and cause what's called energy degeneracy. And so we know very firmly that it is real. The only debate about 0-point energy has always been, can you extract it? Can you do work with it? And generally speaking, the status quo has always been that you cannot. And there's a bunch of papers as to why, a whole bunch of math and proofs and things like that. And so Nell was arguing that, well, I shouldn't say Nell, Hal Puthoff, in that clip that you aired, he was talking about potential abilities to manipulate its density. Meaning, like, you have a sloppy bag of water, like a Ziploc bag full of water, and you put your hand and you press on one side or the other, and it's not taut, and you force the water over to one side, or you force the water to the other side. That's like the energy in the quantum vacuum, and maybe you can push it around, and maybe you can create gradients such that it will push you. That's the idea behind Hal's talk that you were airing.
But it is not exactly anti-gravity. I know I used the word anti-gravity on the title. It is not exactly that, is it?
No, probably not. We're speaking in somewhat hypotheticals, but more than likely, so there's a couple different ways this is interpreted as possibly, there's a couple different ways it is interpreted that this might give you the ability to go FTL. One of those ways, as implied by Nell's talk, is that if you were to manipulate the quantum vacuum in some way, you could create these really high regions of negative energy density, which, for all intents and purposes, satisfy the necessary conditions for Alcubierre drive, in which case you have a warp drive, and you're manipulating space-time as per Alcubierre's work, and this is where you're getting the negative energy from. Okay, that's the idea there. An alternative hypothesis is that by inflating or deflating space-time, you are manipulating like constants of the universe, such as C or the permittivity of free space, and you're simply changing the rules on what it means to be faster than light, and therefore you're able to do things you could not otherwise do.
So if I understand,
Those are kind of two.
if I understand correctly, though, because I'm a layman, and to put it in layman's terms, you talk about space-time bending or manipulation. Does that mean that potentially, if this is real, that could be a conduit to something related to time dilation or time travel? Or
Well, okay, so yeah, possibly yes. I mean, because general relativity considers time to be part of the space-time metric. If you are operating within laws of physics prescribed by general relativity, as in you are not creating a whole new model and a whole new set of laws, let's assume we're not doing that with this. Let's assume we're operating within general relativity, and you begin to manipulate space-time in these extreme ways, then yes, you can see some novel effects as a result of that with respect to time. Those could take a lot of different forms, because you have to think, in everyday life, we only see one form of time dilation, which is caused by mass and acceleration. In general relativity terms, those are the same thing. Either you are near the speed of light or you're really close to a black hole. In either of those circumstances, you satisfy the conditions for time dilation in the Lorentz transforms in general relativity. But that's the only time we ever see it in nature. So you can imagine, if you have manufactured a device which artificially does that to nature, you can imagine there are many unusual applications of that maybe its effects are not readily predictable. Does that make sense?
yeah, do you think it's possible that there may be use-ups that are already working with this that you're not privy to or you don't know about?
Oh yeah, and I have no professional relationship with the program or any of those sorts of things. My work is comparatively very boring, but yes, I think it's very possible that those things exist. I think it's very likely. To me, the only question is, how far are they? How much progress have they actually made? There's this is a perfect segue. We were going to talk a little bit about the difference between the Greer school of thought and the controlled disclosure
let's do that.
cadres school of thought. Yeah. So in my view, and again, I'm not like an historian on Dr. Greer's claims, so I apologize if I sort of oversimplify things. But my perspective has always been that Greer's assertion is that we have made pretty significant progress. We've manufactured lots of ARVs for a long time, that we understand exactly how they work and all the physics, and we have established knowledge and relationships with all the different NHI, and like the landscape is pretty well figured out, and there's not a lot of mystery or a lot of equivocation. And then the controlled disclosure crowd takes a very opposite tack and suggests that there's been very little progress for a very long time on reverse engineering of the technology, and that they understand very little. And the most you'll get out of any of these folks in terms of speculating on how far they are is they might say, well, we think they're bootstrapping the technology, or we think that they're hacking it. Kind of suggests that, for instance, they found a craft that was in good enough shape that they were able to extract the reactor and then put it on their own thing that they built out of normal materials, and they know how to turn it on. That's kind of what I imagine best case scenario might be. And, that same group kind of asserts that we don't know what NHI really are. We don't, they make no comments about diplomacy or agreements or, galactic federations, or like our knowledge of their political structures or their motives or what they think of each other. That none of that is part of the controlled disclosure narrative. And so I think the answer to quote unquote who is right or why they disagree with each other lies in the question of, why would one of those groups be lying about that? And what's the more likely lie, right? And I just leave that to speculate.
What do you think, though? If you could give us an educated guess.
Yeah. Okay, so caveating with, I can absolutely understand why they would want to lie if there had been agreements made that would send them to the gallows. I can understand lying about that. However, what I find a very likely lie is I could see Greer's version of events being a psyop from the Pentagon to say, look, we know we've been lying for 75 years and we've done all these awful things, but at least we've been wildly successful. At least we've got this and we've got that and we know everything about them and it's all been worth it, because the only thing that could be worse than the lying and the law breaking and the blue collar and white collar crimes and the disappearances and everything, the only thing that could be worse than that is if it was all for nothing or almost nothing. If we're almost basically nowhere on understanding the nature of all of this. So I'm concerned that that's the purpose of it, but I'm just wildly speculating.
Okay, that makes sense. I think that, do you think it's possible that if this is already maybe possibly happening, who do you think could be more compromised between both camps if this is already happening?
Well, that's a good question. If you take on premise that the controlled disclosure group does in fact intend controlled disclosure, that this is not all just gonna fizzle out and disappear. If you think it is coming, but they want it on their terms, that suggests to me that we need to figure out what's changed, right? What's changed between now and 50 years ago? Why now and not before? What's different? I don't honestly believe the public's ability to absorb the information is all that much different than maybe it was 30, 40 years ago. In fact, I think an argument could be made that the short-term state of global destabilization right now is sort of a bad time, maybe. It kind of depends on your perspective. Some people would say, well, it might bring us together. It might be, an external threat, external adversary, all that. I get that. But it could be very destabilizing. So I don't think that the argument is, oh, they've done a think tank and now they think it's going to be okay. So one of the things I think could have happened, because there's a decent amount of evidence of this, is that they're now able to bring the technology out. It's commercializable, it's mature, and they can actually do something with it. And part of the reason I feel that way is with my experience in the defense industry. Something that you have to realize about IRAD is that it doesn't make you any money. In fact, technically IRAD is all money out the door. The only benefit of IRAD is that you ideally develop new proprietary technologies that you can go and advertise as being, special keyhole abilities on future contracts. So the idea is you're developing your own in-house, technologies. But it's a well understood fact in like defense corporate America that it can be hard to make that leap. There's a lot of IRAD spending that probably goes nowhere and does not end up resulting in new revenue, right? So the argument for doing IRAD is kind of poor. I would imagine that, when David Grush said that he to his understanding, at least one of the contractors wanted to divest themselves of material and get out, doesn't surprise me at all, because the security environment would have been draconian. The customer would have been impossible to satisfy. You're making absolutely no money on it. They might be asking you to break the law. There's like a truckload of corporate liability there. My personal opinion is that I would bet nobody wants this to come out more than the corporations, as long as they can be indemnified for any law breaking, as long as they can be indemnified. But, they've got to be tired of throwing money away in IRAD, not getting anything for it, not being able to market it, because at the secrecy level that it's currently at, I understand there's been allegations that there's anti-gravity technology in the B2 and this, that, and that, and the other thing. I'm skeptical of those things. They could be possible. But if they exist, I guarantee you they were a security fucking nightmare to implement. Absolute nightmare. Because it's like thousands of people worked on B2. Tens of thousands, probably. So, like, keeping it secret would have been very hard. And so I suspect that there's a very large drive to go sell this technology in the open, because I would bet that making money off of it in the current secrecy environment is just damn near impossible. So that kind of is my theory on the motive to get it out now.
Do you think China and Russia have already cracked something by any chance? Because they've had their own crashes, obviously. And I saw like a diagram of Jesse Michael's latest documentary where he exposes like the sightings in America. And there's like a really big circle that indicates that in America, according to the nuclear energy, that's where most of the sightings are concentrated. But I saw the map and I saw that China and Russia had no sightings at all. And I just think it's because he didn't have the data for those countries. But I would bet that the circles will be just as big, if not more, in Russia at least. What do you think about that?
I agree with you. I think that the data is missing. You're not going to get honest UFO reports from these autocratic countries. They are able to, lock down and control information and press if they want to. And so I think that trying to infer things from public data is a wash. I don't have any information to that effect, but my gut instinct is that yes, they have their own programs. As a matter of fact, I believe David Grush has said in public that one of the big alarm bells moments that he had is that he was looking through foreign source intelligence, meaning electronics intercepts that allied intelligence organizations had collected on adversary communications. And inside those intercepts were contained conversations or data on the American reverse engineering program, right? So you follow, so an American ally, somebody in the Five Eyes, had intercepted electronics intercepts from an American adversary that the adversary was discussing our program. And I don't know how many years ago that was, but it wasn't super, super recently. So if they became aware of it a long time ago, now here's the thing. I know there have been other whistleblowers and other leakers and other UFO figures who have alleged that the Russians were involved in the 80s, like they've known about it forever. In fact, Harold Malmgren and Russ Coulthart have both said that part of the SALT talks, the anti-ballistic missile, or the nuclear test ban treaty talks and the missile defense treaty talks involved the U.S. and Russia acknowledging to one another that UAP were real and that they could trip sensors and cause one or the other to think that they're being nuked when they're not, and that they needed to be aware of those things so that, they didn't shoot at each other by accident. So there's at least some inferences we can make that these great powers have known about this for a while. And as China has shot forward as a defense and aerospace peer in the last 10 years, I have every expectation that they're, balls to the wall trying to figure it out. And I think that is a motive of some of the controlled disclosure folks, is that I think they have finally put their foot down with the lack of progress from the program and have said, look, this is a national security danger at this point. You are overdoing security. We can't hire anybody. We can't recruit anybody. We can't collaborate, and we're getting nowhere because of it. We need to fix this, and the only way to do that is to soften the security environment and open up a little bit of information. I think that's an angle to what's going on.
Okay. And I want to ask you a little bit about the toys, because given that you're a rocket scientist, do you think it's possible that, I don't know if it's the NRO or the Air Force or DARPA or the DOE may have some kind of technology that can already identify either objects or stuff in space more effectively than the known toys? Because I heard a rumor about quantum satellites that I know it's not proven or anything, but do you have any knowledge about that, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can clear this up a little bit. Number one, yes, there are a whole lot of space sensing assets in orbit, and more going up every month that have extremely advanced capabilities. The the troublesome aspect about satellite surveillance and satellite ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, is that computational technology and sensor technology, the technology of the small, has moved so fast that and launch campaigns can frequently be so slow, and it takes a long time to build the rocket motor and get in the past, before SpaceX, launches with NASA were, I don't know, 4 or 5 per year, among across like National Science Foundation and Defense and NRO and everything. I mean, it was very, very slow. So one of the problems they had is that frequently, by the time they were putting a new spy satellite up, it was out of date. It was OBE. And that was a huge problem for a while. So now that launch cadence has picked up significantly, that's less of a problem. But yes, unequivocally, there are assets up there with all kinds of different sensor packages and different objectives, different things they're interested in looking at. It's public knowledge that there are launch detection satellites that look for ballistic missile launches, in other countries and things like that. Okay, let's switch to this quantum thing. So the term quantum frequently gets sort of just tacked on to things to make it sound sexy. However, there are certain sensors that have been developed over the last, 10 years or so that use different quantum mechanical tricks to gain extremely precise measurements. For example, the Parker Solar Probe has just such a sensor package for studying the sun. It actually has something sort of analogous to what Star Trek called the Heisenberg compensators, which were like these devices that were on the teleporters, the transporters, that were meant to overcome or compensate for Heisenberg uncertainty so that you could put someone's molecules all back together in exactly the right way without any uncertainty. There's a device on Parker Solar Probe that uses a trick. It doesn't actually break Heisenberg, but it gets around it to a degree to do these exceedingly precise measurements. And so generally all that's talking about when you hear about quantum satellites, it's just talking about sensors on board that are, state of the art, maybe a factor, maybe an order of magnitude more precise than the previous generation.
Okay. I wanted to also ask you about any potential work that you may be doing right now, if you want to share with people related to all of this. Anything you can share?
Yeah, I can talk about my graduate work. So, pursuing a PhD in material science, I'm very interested in what are called topological materials, which are a subset of metamaterials. There are other types of metamaterials, like optical metamaterials, that are different. Topological materials are a family of materials that are kind of like the parent material for semiconductors and superconductors and insulators. So if you're a fan of like Thomas Townsend Brown's work, the old literature used to call insulators dielectrics. Same thing. It just means a non-metal that doesn't easily conduct electricity. Electrons don't flow through them freely. And so and semiconductors are the base material that like all computer chips and all of our semiconductor electronics are made out of. And then superconductors, of course, are these interesting materials that conduct electricity with no loss, no resistance, and superconductors have been around for quite some time, but we don't really understand how to develop a room temperature superconductor. Generally, to have a material be superconducting, it has to be near absolute zero temperature or in the presence of a gigantic magnetic field, both of which make it really hard to implement in everyday devices. So there's an enormous desire to develop a superconductor which is superconducting in everyday circumstances, atmospheric temperature, atmospheric pressure, no giant magnetic field, because you could produce these incredibly efficient lossless devices, lossless power generation. I would say that the next most disruptive and amazing advance that could be made in technology behind anti-gravity would be widespread availability of room temperature superconductors. It would transform a lot of our lives in really invisible ways due to all of the really intangible advances that it would confer upon every kind of electronic device and power generating device that we use in the modern world. So I'm very interested in those kinds of applications in topological material science.
You remind me of an episode of Jesse Michaels with Putoff and Eric Weinstein, where Putoff said that something very interesting that I remember now, that he said that it was possible that topological physics was being hidden from mainstream science. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think that's probably a good bet. I think he was saying, because that was an excellent podcast. I highly recommend it to anyone. And it was so enjoyable because Weinstein was, of course, like extremely skeptical, and Hal was just super comfortable. And he's like, well, it has happened. I promise you. Well, what I found also very interesting in that is that Weinstein asked Hal, do you think somebody in defense is in command of new physics? Is there a new unification theory that's hiding behind the wall somewhere at Lockheed or whatever? And he said, no, I don't think that. And he goes, but you think there are advances in like material science, like topological material science and things like that? And he's like, yes, I do. Or I got the impression Hal didn't just think it. I got the impression he knows it to be true. And yeah, so those have applications in things like microelectronics, stealth materials, radar materials, things of that nature.
A lot of that may be classified. That's why we don't know about it as openly, right?
Well, yeah, and a lot of it might be application specific. So a lot of classified material is so technical in nature. I've joked with my partner that, if I told her something classified, more than likely she wouldn't have any idea what to do with it, because it's frequently something very technical, something to do with a number. It's not usually, there are entire programs that are classified. So I'll give you an example. The world generally knows that Lockheed Martin is manufacturing a new air-to-air missile called the AIM-260 AMRAAM. It's generally common knowledge that that is in development and is going to be made. However, most missile programs, you can go to like the Congress website and download these PDFs of like its procurement history, what it costs per unit, how many they're expecting to make this year and next year, and all this sorts of stuff. With a program like AIM-260, all that's completely classified. The whole program is SAP. So none of that is known. We don't know how many they're going to make. We don't know how much they cost. None of that stuff. It's all buttoned up. And so there are, some examples of programs like that where the entire thing is classified. Similarly, like obviously the UFO reverse engineering programs are likely in that same bucket where the names are not even known, and similarly, people have noted how the National Reconnaissance Office, the NRO, as an organization that it even existed, was classified information until like 1985, and it existed for like 25 years before that, and nobody even knew it was there. It's as if having an FBI that no one knows is there. And so you can safely assume the same is probably true today. There are probably 3-letter agencies that exist whose entire existence is not known. So things like OGA, and other things like that.
How far along do you think we are to more transparency in these areas? Because I think and I see that there is some resistance, a lot of resistance from many of these agencies that are known. And I wonder if you feel hopeful for more transparency on this front.
Yeah, I'm hopeful. Cautiously hopeful. I don't think they're going to do it for our benefit. And so I'm sad to say that I think that what comes out to the public might be really muted and really underwhelming. I'm worried that might be the case. And if that, like, they don't even know how to do it. If you listen to like Nell and Gallaudet and Mellon talk, it sounds like they've talked to people in policymaking circles, for instance, on the National Security Council and in the White House staff and things. And it sounds like there is a very prescient concern that they don't know how to tell the public, hey, we're not alone. Okay, thanks. No questions. Bye. They don't know how to do that because they know there's going to be 10,000 follow-up questions. So they don't know where to draw the line. in order to prevent getting into like operational details. So number one, I'm sure lots of people believe, and I don't necessarily disagree, that a lot of what they're going to conceal is to conceal wrongdoing or embarrassment or law breaking or breaking the public trust or violating international agreements or whatever, like really deep wrongs. That's probably in there somewhere. It might have been that sort of stuff ended in the Cold War. You know, the CIA is highly bureaucratic today. I've talked to lots of CIA people that say it's just nothing like it used to be. It's not cavalier anymore. You know, you can't throw a paperclip at somebody without a lawyer in the room, this kind of thing. So it's possible the really, really dirty laundry is from like a little bit back in the day. I don't know. But at the same time, I think that they just don't know where to draw that line so that they tell the public the existential reality, but they don't drag themselves into a back and forth where, like, as you can imagine, the media cycle would be dominated by it. If they just had a short press conference and, you know, offloaded the basic facts and then walked off, we would be paralyzed with questions I would hope so anyway. Maybe the news cycle would swallow it, but I think they don't know where to snap the line. And I'm concerned that paranoia, that anxiety will just sort of linger and never disappear, and nobody will just take the fucking plunge and do it, you know?
Yeah. It does seem to me like there's a lot of, how do I put it? They're way in over their heads in a lot of senses, you know? But I want to ask you about something a little bit more fringe before we go. It has to do with mysterious deaths of people in science who have apparently done some breakthroughs in history, and they either died mysteriously or disappeared. There are many examples. We know about Amy Eskridge, who is a more recent example, but there's like the case of Dr. Jacobo Greenberg, who I have been investigating for a while, but there are many other examples. What is your take on these occurrences? Do you think there's something there? Do you think they really did discover something, or they stepped over the line and something happened? What is your take on that?
Yeah, I'm kind of two minds about it. You know, I generally do think there's something there in some of those cases. I've been led to believe that Grush, when Grush said in Congress in open session that there had been harm done to people to conceal, to maintain the secrecy, I've been led to believe that on the closed side, he submitted documentation about that, which contained names we would recognize. That's all I'm going to say. And so I think if he thinks there's something to it, I'm sure his sources are way better than mine. So there's probably something to it. I will say I would find it more immediately plausible that if there is a foreign program to develop these technologies, and if there is a weapons race, and if there has been a weapons race for, like, let's say at least 20 years, then some of these things that have been perpetrated against American scientists could have been done by foreign intelligence services to shut down their research, to slow down the American government, to sabotage our efforts. That strikes me as just more conventionally likely than our own governments killing those people. Now, granted, I'm sure that their first move would have been to recruit these people, right? To grab them, put them in black programs, and have them work for them for the rest of their lives. And that appears to be what took place with Dr. Ning Lee before she had that accident on University of Alabama Huntsville campus, is that she said yes. You know, she went to work at Redstone. And it was many years later that she had that accident. So it doesn't make any sense to me that domestic actors would have done anything to Ning Lee, because she was playing ball. She was working for us. She was a patriot, very much so. You know, she fled China when she was young and wanted nothing to do with them. So I really don't think that she was a sympathizer or anything like that. So I think it seems much more rational to me that maybe foreign intelligence services have targeted American scientists than American government has targeted American scientists. That's just my take.
Okay. This is going to be the last question, but I think it's going to take us a few minutes to talk about. It has to do with some documents that Jesse Michaels recently talked about, where Edward Teller and J. Robert Oppenheimer and other prominent scientists are allegedly involved with some of these UFO programs. What is your reaction to that information that was dropped by Jesse? Because I think it was really interesting, but it was also really controversial because mainstream science and academia obviously think that is not true. So, what do you think about that?
Oh, I think it's very likely. I've talked to Jesse about this a few times, and we're in agreement. There's actually a pretty significant paper trail on this. He's really done an amazing amount of research, and it's a very credible account. And not only that, but even if you didn't have actual paper on it, I would say just from first principles, it makes perfect sense because let's say it's 1947 and something falls out of the sky and it like, let's say hypothetically, it's like kind of radioactive or there's something in there that looks like it might be a nuclear reactor or something advanced. Who are you going to go to? You just had the Manhattan Project. Who are the most brilliant scientists in your government? You're going to go to those guys. You're going to go to Vannevar Bush and Teller and Oppenheimer and Robert Wheeler and all those guys. And so, yeah, I think that following up on what they did after the war and what they were interested in and where they were working and who they were affiliated with is absolutely a valuable line of inquiry.
Okay. And I mean, this also does kind of explain a little bit of the behavior that Oppenheimer was, or the pressure he was like seemingly under when he was run out of the program, right? Or the atomic program, right?
Yeah, I heard that theory that he may have actually been run out because he sort of objected to the UFO program or something. I don't have any other. I heard it for the first time in that documentary, like you. So it's interesting. I don't know.
And about Tesla, just before we leave, because I want to ask you as a scientist, what is your overall take on Tesla and his work? And when he died, that they took a lot of his work for the government. What's your overall take on that?
Yeah, I built a Tesla coil in high school, a couple of them, and yeah, he was brilliant. He was one of the most brilliant physicists of all time, for sure. He wasn't really interested in gravity, but what you could say is if it turns out that there's anything about electromagnetism that we are still missing, for example, things like scalar waves, or if electrogravitics is true in some form, like there does turn out to be a way to unify an approach to electromagnetism and other forces, gravitation specifically, because we have united it with the weak force and the strong force. But if there turned out to be a way to do all that, Tesla was certainly the savant whose mind and experiments could have given hint of that. I will say that Tesla didn't know anything about about 0 point energy per se, in that the Casimir effect was not detected until many years after Tesla died. However, he was active during the birth of quantum mechanics and quantum theory. He wasn't especially interested in quantum mechanics. He was completely consumed with the mysteries of classical electrodynamics and electromagnetics. So I'm sure he was schooled and familiar with quantum mechanics, but I'm not aware of him having performed any seminal work on the subject of the quantum vacuum that sort of had anything to do with the eventual discovery of the Casimir force. So I know that folks here are familiar with Tesla having talked about free energy. The thing I'm familiar with is that he wanted to build these huge towers that would broadcast electrical energy really far away, like that tower in Colorado Springs, which I forgot to go see because I was there. But you could broadcast power really far away. The problem with that today is that it would like roast all of our electronics. Your radio would get static all the time. Computers wouldn't work. Wi-Fi wouldn't work. But like in the 1930s, that didn't matter because they had no electrical devices. Nothing was emanating. It was a non-issue. But there are a lot of practical problems with broadcasting power in that manner. So I'm only familiar with that sort of thing. I know that he made these sort of mysterious veiled comments before he died about believing there was like a way to get free energy that was sort of baked into the universe. You could argue that like on a purely conceptual basis, he was talking about the vacuum fluctuation field. You could absolutely say that. but I just don't think he did any really rigorous professional work on it. If somebody has something they know of that proves me wrong, if there's a paper he wrote or something, I'd love to see it, or a lecture he gave, because I think he mostly did lectures. He didn't publish all that much. He mostly did lectures. But yeah, I mean, he invented the induction motor, the AC/DC motor that we use in everything. If you have a toy for your kid and the Hoover Dam, both of those motors from Tesla, it transformed society. It was unbelievable.
All right. Just to finish, I want to thank you for giving us your time to talk about this. But I want to ask you, where do you see all of this going? Let's say a year from now. Do you think we're gonna have some public announcement or breakthrough of some new science, or anything related to that?
I'm not aware of anything in the sciences. One of the things that occurred to me when we were talking about the Manhattan scientists is that I would bet you money that in the years after they were recruited into the program, they probably tried to publish as much theoretical physics as they could that was like tiptoeing around the edges of what they were learning behind the wall, because they were probably hoping that their colleagues would pick up on the breadcrumbs in the open forum and basically, twig to what's going on and publish real physics. And so I have always wondered, you see these patents that are published and these papers that are published. There's this Larry Reed guy, the Jerry from NASA paper, right? That he published. That guy is super interesting because if you look up Larry Reed, he has like a bachelor's in aviation technology from Embry-Riddle. And this theoretical physics work he did is like dramatically sophisticated. It's incredibly sophisticated. I'm still combing through it. I have the book on the way. But he was like 32 years at Lockheed Martin. So you're like, where did this come from? So I do wonder if scientists who are in and out of the program are trying sometimes to publish stuff on the side that is not real obviously part of that work, but they're trying to like help their colleagues, like lead them to water, that kind of thing could happen. But I don't think we should expect the secret keepers to do us any favors. And I don't generally consider the controlled disclosure group to be quote unquote the secret keepers. I've spent a fair amount of time with Gary Nolan. He's a really genuine human being. I don't think he has ulterior motives to all of this. Yes, he knows more than you and I, but I think he very honestly wants the world to know. And I believe that about David Grush as well, and about others. And so I do think a few of them are ideologically motivated to get this out. And I think that if the secret keepers in government continue to stonewall, there are people who have become proximal to the truth that are just going to get fed up because they're already pretty damn fed up. And so I think there's going to continue to be a drip until it becomes impractical to maintain the secrecy. That's my hope.
That's what they call catastrophic, right? That's what they mean.
Well, catastrophic is somebody else making the decision for us, essentially, either the NHI or an adversary, and it does worry me that taking place. I'm more worried about an adversary doing it. I'm not saying I don't think an NHI would. I just don't have any information on that. I'd be wildly guessing, but it seems extremely advantageous for China to do it, to basically come out and say, yeah, we know about them. We're on good terms. The Americans keep shooting at them. They're trying to cause a war. Like, that would be a massive information warfare success for them. And it worries me a lot. And so we got to get a move on. We got to be the ones to take the lead, or it's going to be bad for us.
Who knows? Maybe it will come from Latin America. Nobody knows.
Who knows, man? It could. I mean, you guys have contributed disproportionately in enormous ways, for sure.
All right. Missileman, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank everybody for being on this space. I'm sorry that I couldn't take any speakers. I just wanted a conversation for you to listen, and I'll see you guys on the next space. Thank you, Missileman. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Have a good one. Bye.